In this video I'm going to demonstrate how while loops work in MATLAB and how to use them. So for while loops we have to define our initial condition. Let's say it's t equals 0. This is the variable that we will be checking during the while loop. So while t is less than 12, let's say. In the while loop, something has to happen to t to make it change so that the loop eventually ends. So while t is less than 12, this loop will run. When t is finally greater than or equal to 12, it will stop. So we need to do something to t to take it from 0 and make it at least equal to 12 at some point. So t equals t plus 1. End. And when we run our loop, every time it went around, it added 1 to t, until it got to 12, and it was equal to 12, it was no longer less than 12, so it ended. If you only wanted to display the end number, you can suppress the output when it runs every single time through the loop, and then at the very end you can just display t. And now, when you run it, it just gives you the value of t. Now we can do a bigger example, doing kind of like a cruise control, that if assuming that a car accelerates at a constant 3.5, and I'll comment out the units, meters per second squared, how long will it take the car to get to a final velocity? So I need an initial velocity at 0, and then I need to set my variables for my while loop equal to 0 as well. So the variable that I'm going to be checking is final velocity, because when my final velocity equals 26.8224 meters per second, I want the loop to stop. It's the equivalent of a 0 to 60 miles per hour measurement that we would take for cars. I also need to set my time equal to 0 initially for the while loop. And I can suppress all of these so that they don't show up every time that I've run my script. Now I can make my while loop. So while my final velocity is less than 26.8224, and that is in meters per second, I want to add a little bit to my time. So t equals t plus 0.01, and then I have to run it through the final velocity equation to see if I've reached the final velocity that I want. So my final velocity will equal my initial velocity plus my acceleration, which was a, times the time, t. And remember, if I don't want these to output every time my loop runs, I need to suppress those as well. I can end my while loop and then display my values of t, and I can display my final velocity. If I run my while loop, it now gives me t and a final velocity. You can make your displays a little easier to read with an fprintf. The final velocity of, I'll give it 2 decimal places, is reached at seconds. And I'll probably want to put my miles per hour, or meters per hour, and meters per second in there. Then I need my v sub f is my first variable over here. You have to name them in order, comma, my second variable was my time. I'll run my script. So the final velocity of 26.84 meters per second is reached at 7.7 seconds. And note how my cursor starts over here. To prevent that, we need to start a new line right after this sentence. To start a new line, we do \n, and that's the slash that's above the enter key or below your backspace key generally. We can try running it one more time, and then it starts a new line for us. The last thing I want to mention is oftentimes we want to know how to do a counter in MATLAB. So it will count how many times the while loop goes around. So we can name it counter equals counter plus 1, so that it adds 1 every time we go around the loop, and therefore we also need to define the counter variable as starting at 0 before it runs, so that it doesn't get here and say, I don't know what counter is, so I can't add 1 to counter. If we started at 0 the first time it runs, it adds 1 to it, then it's 0. Then it goes around again, adds another, and it will count how many times it goes around the while loop. We can just display the counter under the fprintf for demonstration purposes. You can always put it in your fprintf or make something pretty out of it afterwards. But I forgot to suppress my counter in my while loop, so it showed up every time, but it also showed up at the end as expected. I can suppress it within my loop, clear all of this, and run it again, and I just get that with my counter. Once again, you can explain what that is in your output. Now that we've covered while loops in MATLAB, stay tuned for the next video on for loops in MATLAB.